In the summer of 1683, the fate of Europe balanced on a single city. To the east, the mighty Ottoman Empire, 300,000 strong, a tide of banners, cannons, and steel rolling toward Vienna like the wrath of God. To the west, 15,000 defenders, a handful of soldiers, priests, and citizens standing on crumbling walls with nothing left but faith and fire. For 60 days, the city burned beneath the crescent moon. For 60 nights, its people fought not for victory, but for survival. It was a war between worlds, Islam and Christendom, empire and resistance, darkness and dawn. And when the dust settled, one truth would echo across the centuries, that courage, not numbers, decides the fate of civilizations. This is the story of the Second Siege of Vienna, the battle that saved Europe from the edge of conquest. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire had never abandoned its dream of conquering Europe, and Vienna was the gateway to that dream, the key to the heart of the continent. More than 100 years earlier, in 1529, the mighty Ottoman Empire under Suleiman the Magnificent had already tried to take Vienna, but rain, mud, and fierce resistance broke the great army's strength. The siege failed. Suleiman withdrew, leaving behind thousands of dead men and a dream unfinished. That memory never died. For the Ottomans, Vienna remained a wound to heal, a victory still waiting to be claimed. By the late 1600s, the empire was still powerful, but its borders were beginning to tremble. Inside Europe, the Christian kingdoms were divided. France competed with the Habsburgs for power. Catholic and Protestant states distrusted one another. It was the perfect moment for an old ambition to rise again. In Istanbul, Sultan Mehmed IV dreamed of restoring Ottoman glory, but it was his Grand Vizier, Kara Mustafa Pasha, who turned that dream into war. He was proud, disciplined, and dangerously confident. He believed destiny itself had chosen him to finish what Suleiman had begun. He told the Sultan, "Let me take Vienna, and I will open the road to all of Europe." The Sultan agreed, and so began one of the largest military campaigns of the 17th century. In the spring of 1683, the empire gathered its strength. Janissaries in white turbans marched beside Sipahi cavalry. Tatar horsemen from the steppes joined in, howling their war cries under the green banners of Islam. Engineers, miners, and gunners followed, with wagons full of food, powder, and cannons. Nearly 300,000 soldiers moved west. It was not just an army, it was a nation on the march. Their goal was clear: to crush the Habsburgs, capture Vienna, and push the Ottoman frontier deep into Central Europe. But beyond conquest, it was about faith, pride, and revenge. Across the frontier, the Holy Roman Emperor Leopold I hesitated. He feared the divided Christian powers would never unite in time. And when the Ottoman advance grew near, he abandoned Vienna and fled west to Linz. He left behind only 15,000 defenders, and one man to lead them, Count Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg. Starhemberg was a man of iron will. He knew the walls were old, the people afraid, and the odds impossible. But he also knew what the Sultan had forgotten. The Ottomans had tried once before and failed, and this time he swore Vienna would stand again. He sealed the gates. He called every citizen to arms. Men filled sandbags and hauled bricks to the ramparts. Women carried water and supplies to the soldiers. Children brought powder to the guns. The sound of hammers and church bells echoed through the streets. On July 14th, 1683, the horizon turned black. The Ottoman army had arrived. Rows of tents covered the plains like a sea of white cloth. Drums rolled like thunder across the valley, and at the center stood a great green pavilion, the headquarters of Kara Mustafa Pasha himself. That night, Vienna's people watched fires rise beyond the walls. The air smelled of smoke and fear. Some prayed, some wept. And when dawn came, the first cannon fired. The ground trembled. The second siege of Vienna had begun. The city was surrounded, but not yet defeated. By mid-July 1683, Vienna was a city trapped between earth and fire. The Ottoman army surrounded it from every side. A living ocean of tents, banners, and soldiers stretching to the horizon. Every day the ground shook under the thunder of cannons. Every night the sky burned red from endless campfires. Inside the walls, Count Starhemberg fought not just the enemy outside, but the fear within. He divided the city into defense sectors, assigning every gate and every wall to a captain. Old men patrolled the streets. Women carried water and stones to the bastions. Children worked as runners, bringing messages and powder. No one was idle. Vienna had become a fortress made of faith. The first Ottoman bombardment began on July 17th. Cannonballs smashed into towers, crashing through roofs and houses. The citizens learned to live with the sound. The deep boom, the falling dust, the distant cries of the wounded. And through it all, church bells kept ringing, reminding the city that life still existed between the explosions. Kara Mustafa watched from his great green pavilion. He was calm, patient, certain of victory. He did not want to destroy Vienna. He wanted to capture it whole. A jewel for the Sultan, not a ruin. So he ordered his engineers to dig, not charge. His miners burrowed under the walls, packing gunpowder into tunnels to blow open the defenses. Each day his trenches crept closer. Each night the defenders struck back with raids and countermines. They fought in darkness, deep beneath the earth, where air was thin and every sound echoed like a whisper from hell. Sometimes the miners met underground, staring into each other's faces by the light of a single torch, then fighting with knives and picks in the choking dust. By early August, the city's supplies were dwindling. Food was rationed. Horses were slaughtered for meat. Water became thick and foul. Sickness spread. The smell of rot hung over the streets. But still, no one spoke of surrender. Not while Starhemberg still stood on the walls. The Count himself was wounded, a musket ball through his shoulder, but he refused to rest. He walked the ramparts every evening, greeting the soldiers by name, his bandaged arm bleeding through his coat. When they faltered, he told them, "Hold on. Help will come," even when he wasn't sure of it himself. Outside the walls, Kara Mustafa's patience began to wear thin. Weeks had passed. His men were dying by the thousands from disease and exhaustion. The trenches filled with rainwater and mud. But he refused to order a full assault. He wanted Vienna to fall by fear, not fire, to surrender and glorify his name forever. His officers begged him to attack. The Janissary commanders warned that morale was falling, but the Grand Vizier's pride was greater than his caution. He believed the city would soon collapse on its own. He was wrong. Far away to the north, word of Vienna's desperation reached Poland. King John III Sobieski, a soldier and strategist known for defeating the Ottomans years earlier, read the emperor's plea for help. He understood what was at stake. If Vienna fell, the Ottoman Empire would open the gates to all of Europe. There would be no Poland, no Germany, no Christendom. So he gathered his nobles and knights, and he spoke with fire in his voice. "Vienna is the wall that protects us all. If it falls, we fall with it." Within weeks, his army was on the march. 20,000 Polish soldiers riding south, joined by German and Austrian reinforcements along the way. It was the first true alliance Europe had seen in generations. A Holy League united not by politics, but survival. Meanwhile, inside Vienna, hope was fading fast. The Ottomans had breached several outer bastions. The defenders were pushed back to the inner walls. Starhemberg's men were exhausted, starving, many fighting barefoot and bleeding. Yet every time the crescent flag was raised on the walls, they tore it down again. By early September, Vienna was on the edge of collapse. The Ottomans prepared for a final assault. Their cannons fired day and night. The air shimmered with smoke. Every window shattered. Every street was filled with rubble. And still the bells rang. Then one night, as Kara Mustafa looked toward the northern hills, he saw something strange. Flickers of light in the forest. At first he thought it was lightning, Then the lights moved. Torches. Thousands of them. The relief army had arrived. Sobieski was near, and the tide of the siege was about to turn. By early September, the hills north of Vienna came alive with motion. What had once been silent forests now echoed with the sound of marching boots, neighing horses, and rattling wagons. The relief army had arrived, and leading it was a man whose name would soon become legend. King John III Sobieski of Poland. He was 54 years old, a veteran of countless battles. He had fought Tatars, Cossacks, and Ottomans before, and he knew their tactics better than most of his enemies knew their own. But this was different. The fate of all Europe rested on what would happen here. The alliance he commanded was vast and fragile. It was made of men who had once fought each other. Germans, Austrians, Poles, and Hungarians, now standing side by side for the first time in living memory. They spoke different languages, prayed in different ways, and mistrusted one another deeply. But for this battle, they shared one belief: that Vienna must not fall. Sobieski met Duke Charles of Lorraine, the imperial commander, on the northern plain. Their handshake sealed the alliance. They decided to attack from the Kahlenberg Hills, a high ridge overlooking the Ottoman camp. From there, they could strike down from above, surprise the enemy who believed victory was already theirs. It was a daring plan. To reach the ridge, the army had to cross dense forests and steep valleys, dragging cannon and wagons through mud and narrow passes. The Poles led the way, clearing paths by torchlight. Priests marched among the soldiers, carrying crosses and singing hymns. Men whispered prayers as they climbed, and in the distance, beyond the mist, they could already see the glow of Vienna burning. Inside the city, the defenders held on by the edge of exhaustion. The Ottoman guns pounded day and night. Walls crumbled. The wounded filled every church. Bodies lay unburied in the streets. The smell of smoke, blood, and death hung in the air. On the night of September 11th, a soldier on the northern wall thought he saw something in the darkness. Faint lights, small flickering points, moving through the trees. He blinked, unsure if it was real. Then more lights appeared, hundreds, then thousands. The bells of Vienna began to ring wildly. The defenders shouted to one another, and for the first time in months, their voices carried not fear, but hope. Outside the walls, Kara Mustafa also saw the lights. At first, he thought they were fleeing villagers. Then came the sound, distant drums, trumpets, and the thunder of hooves. The realization hit him like a blow. The Christian alliance was here. The armies of Europe were marching out of the forest to meet him. He summoned his commanders and ordered the camp to prepare for battle. The siege, after 2 long months, was about to become a full-scale war. At dawn on September 12, 1683, the mist over the Kahlenberg Ridge began to lift. Below, the vast Ottoman camp stirred like a waking beast. Drums rolled, trumpets called. Tens of thousands of soldiers armed themselves for battle, believing this would be the day they finally took Vienna. They were wrong. On the ridge above, the Christian army was ready. Polish banners fluttered beside Austrian and German flags. Priests blessed the soldiers, and the sound of hymns rose over the valley, soft at first, then echoing like thunder. King John III Sobieski rode to the front. He wore shining armor, an eagle-feathered helm, and at his side hung a saber that had cut through 100 battles. He raised his hand toward the city below and gave the signal. The attack began. From the left, Charles of Lorraine's Austrian troops descended through the forest, striking the Ottoman flanks. From the center, German infantry pushed forward, driving the enemy from the trenches and redoubts. Smoke filled the air. The ground trembled under the thunder of cannon fire. Ottoman janissaries fought fiercely, their white turbans flashing in the sunlight as they rallied again and again. The battle stretched for miles across the hills. For hours, the two armies clashed in brutal combat. Lines broke, reformed, and broke again. Every hill, every ravine turned into a killing ground. By noon, the Christian advance had reached the outskirts of the Ottoman camp. But Kara Mustafa's elite janissaries held firm. The Grand Vizier himself directed the defense from his green pavilion, calm but furious, ordering counterattacks with wave after wave of men. Inside Vienna, the defenders heard the sound of distant gunfire. At first, they thought it was just another Ottoman assault. Then they realized the sound came from the north, from the hills, from salvation. They rushed to the walls, shouting, waving flags, firing their cannons in support. For the first time in 2 months, they were not alone. By mid-afternoon, the Ottoman camp was chaos. Their lines began to waver. Kara Mustafa sent in his reserves, his cavalry, his pride. Thousands of horsemen thundered forward, their armor glinting like a river of steel. They charged the center, hoping to break the Germans before the Poles could descend. And then, from the ridge above, came a sound like the sky tearing open, the horns of Poland. Sobieski had waited all day for this moment. He turned to his men, 3,000 winged hussars, Poland's most feared warriors, their backs crowned with wooden wings that hissed and roared in the wind. Behind them stood 20,000 more cavalry, the largest mounted force assembled in Europe since the Middle Ages. Sobieski drew his saber, pointed it downhill, and shouted one word: "Charge!" The earth shook, the hills roared, and the cavalry plunged down the slope like an avalanche of iron. They rode in perfect formation, lances lowered, banners streaming, sunlight flashing from 1,000 steel points. The Ottoman lines broke on impact. No armor, no wall, no will could stand against that storm. In less than half an hour, the greatest cavalry charge in European history smashed through the Ottoman camp, straight toward the green pavilion of Kara Mustafa. The Grand Vizier tried to rally his men, but panic had already taken hold. The janissaries fell back. Cavalry fled. Tents burned. The field turned into chaos and smoke. Kara Mustafa watched in disbelief as his army, his empire's pride, collapsed before his eyes. By sunset, the Ottoman camp was in ruins. Thousands of men lay dead. Drums and banners littered the ground. The survivors fled toward Hungary and confusion. When the smoke finally cleared, Vienna was no longer a city, it was a scar upon the earth. The fields around it were littered with bodies, armor glinting like shattered glass beneath the pale sun. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the stench of death. Even the air seemed heavy, as if it carried the weight of everything that had happened there. Inside the walls, the people emerged in disbelief. The siege had lasted 2 long months, 60 days of hunger, fear, and endless night. And yet somehow the city still stood. Families searched the ruins for their loved ones. Priests walked the streets, blessing the dead. And when the bells rang that evening, their sound was no longer desperate. It was defiant. It was the sound of survival. Count Starhemberg could barely stand. His uniform was torn, his shoulder still bleeding, but he insisted on greeting the man who had saved them. When Sobieski rode through Vienna's gates, dust-covered and weary, the people fell to their knees. They called him the savior of Europe. He dismounted, embraced Starhemberg, and whispered, "It was your courage that held until we came." There were no parades that night, only silence, prayers, and tears. But beyond the walls, in every church across the continent, candles were lit for Vienna. From Rome to Krakow, from Venice to Prague, the news spread like a rising flame. The Ottomans had been defeated. Europe had been saved, far away in Belgrade. The message reached Sultan Mehmed IV. He read it slowly, his hands trembling as he understood what it meant. The empire's greatest army had been shattered, its banners captured, its pride humiliated, and the man he had trusted most, Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, had failed. The Sultan said nothing, but days later a messenger rode to Kara Mustafa's camp in Hungary. He carried no letter, no words of comfort, only a silken cord. It was the sign of royal justice. Kara Mustafa understood. He bowed his head, wrapped the cord around his neck, and accepted his fate in silence. The man who had once commanded 300,000 soldiers died alone in a tent. His death marked the end of the Ottoman dream of conquering Europe. In Vienna, life slowly returned. The walls were rebuilt, the fields were cleared, but the scars would never truly fade. Children grew up hearing stories of that summer, of hunger, of fire, and of the thunder that came from the northern hills. For the rest of his life, Sobieski was hailed as a hero. He rode back to Poland, not as a conqueror, but as a guardian. When he entered Krakow, the people showered him with flowers, singing hymns to the king who had saved Christendom. Yet in his own heart, he carried no triumph, only gratitude. He knew how close the world had come to falling. The victory at Vienna changed everything. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire had been the unstoppable force of the world. But on that September day in 1683, its advance into Europe came to an end. The balance of power shifted. The Christian kingdoms that had once been divided found unity and survival. New alliances were born. The Holy League pressed the war eastward, and one by one, Ottoman strongholds began to fall. For the first time in generations, Europe no longer fought to survive. It began to rise. Historians would later call Vienna the turning point of the modern age. It was where an empire's dream ended and a continent's destiny began. And though centuries have passed, the echoes of that battle still live on. In the ringing of church bells, in the walls that still stand, and in the memory of a city that once faced the darkness alone and did not fall.